Because argument continues today over theories of evolution versus the belief in creationism, one might be forgiven for thinking this is a completely modern debate. However, Charles Darwin published The Origin of Species in 1859. This may have set the stage for the destruction of the remains of giant humans in the early 1900s by the Smithsonian Institution, in order to protect the reputation of the theory of evolution.
When I was in school in 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, I was taught what is called the standard model. It's a standard model of history, the standard model of human origins and evolution, the standard model of history in terms of linear progression from less sophisticated to more sophisticated. Nothing could be further from the truth.
You don't believe that at all?
It's not that I don't believe it. The evidence no longer supports it.
Okay.
I want to be really clear. The evidence, it's not just about belief. It's about being honest with ourselves. We've asked science to tell us who we are, and science is doing a really good job. And the question is, are we willing to embrace the story that science is telling us? The DNA evidence, very recent, in the last 5 years, the DNA evidence no longer supports the theory of evolution as the mechanism for human origins. Evolution is a fact. And I want to be very clear about that. As a geologist, I've seen it in the fossil record, plants, animals, insects, some primates. Something happened 200,000 years ago, and the theory breaks down when it comes to humans. And the DNA shows us that. The DNA shows us very clearly that we did not descend from Neanderthal, for example. Their genome, we can now rebuild their genome and compare theirs to ours. We can actually, sounds like Jurassic Park, the movie. Science fiction, but it's science fact. We can pull the DNA.
You can check your percentage of Neanderthal in you, right?
We can pull the DNA from the bone marrow of fossilized remains of beings that we are supposed to be descended from and compare their DNA to ours. We didn't descend from Neanderthal, and it shows that we did appear on Earth about 200,000 years ago.
Where did we come from, Greg?
Well, to answer the question, why aren't we sharing this? When I asked my friend at the university, I said, why can't you share this with your students? And he said, Greg, you don't understand. He says, if I shared that, he said, it would invalidate my 40-year career as a professor. And I said, no. I said, it would do just the opposite. It would demonstrate to your young students how valid and relevant science is, because it's designed to be constantly updated, and you're doing that. It wouldn't invalidate. And he said, well, think how much money it would cost to change the textbooks. And I said,
it's not a good argument.
I said, you're living in the Stone Age. They're not using textbooks. You changed it on the server, and you've changed it everywhere. And he said, well, think of all my class notes I would have to change. And I said, well, that's your job. But that was an example for me of it's a habit. It's a habit, but it's also threatening. And this is why I think it's so important, Brian. It's more than a philosophical conversation. As we globalize, as we push ourselves together and we see the fear of what that means, cultures coming together in different ways of thinking, we also see a rise in hate. And hate is only possible because of a way of thinking. Rachel Carson was an author in the 1960s. She wrote Silent Spring. She was one of the first environmental authors about the use of the pesticide DDT back in the 1960s. And she made a statement, I read this when I was a kid, and it was so powerful. She said, we only destroy the things that we don't value. We have been taught that human life has very little value through the theory of evolution, that we are a random process, genetic mutations. The textbook says that life is a behavior pattern that chemical systems exhibit when they reach a certain level of complexity. That's the definition of life that we're giving to our young people in school today. And it is such a sterile definition. It leaves no room for the specialness and the preciousness of life. And so our young people, through the video games that are very heartless, very violent, through the media, through the television, Where are we instilling into our young people how precious and special life is? And if we're going to change that, when we begin to see what the DNA is telling us, it tells us something far beyond random genetic mutations is responsible for us. And that's, I think, where the change in thinking must begin.
Okay. And do we know where we came from at this point? Or do we just know that there's some kind of strange anomaly where 200,000 years ago, new DNA is introduced that couldn't have been morphed from Neanderthal? We didn't necessarily come from some other mammal form.
We don't know. That's the whole. I released a book in 2017. It's entitled Human by Design. The first half of the book is the peer-reviewed science that is now revealing the facts that tell us that evolution not only is not, but it cannot be our story. And this is the whole point. Science, our young people today in universities are about to dedicate their entire lives to unraveling the mystery of our origin. They're being forced to take every iota, every piece of evidence they find, and force it into a pre-existing story called evolution. Even if it doesn't fit, it's like a square peg in a round hole. If you pound hard enough, it will fit, but it's never a good fit. And there's a huge difference between forcing the evidence into a pre-existing story and allowing the evidence to lead to whatever story it tells. This book is an invitation to do the latter. We don't know what happened, but we do know that where we have been spinning our wheels for 150 years, since Charles Darwin's time. 150 years, the best minds in academia, the best universities, the most advanced technology, the greatest sums of money have been put in to trying to solve this mystery, Brian, and we have yet to come up with one shred of physical evidence that links modern humans with the forms of life that we believe, have been taught to believe, are our predecessors. And if you look at the charts, the Smithsonian Institute, for example, and you look at those very well-known evolutionary family trees, we're up here and all these other forms of life, and we're connected through these lines. If you look closely, the lines are broken lines because they are called inferred or speculative relationships. They're believed to exist, yet no evidence has been found to date. And if we were looking in the right place, I think we would have found something.
So you've got an event and a new book coming out called The New Human Story, and you're talking about, this weekend, I think, some interesting practices that you take people through. And I was wondering if you could talk about some of that energy and longevity and some of those things.
Yeah, well, this is the point. The new book is called Human by Design, and we covered a little bit of that material in a previous interview. And so just to summarize some of that, it's essentially, the book is divided into two parts. The first part of the book, I wanted people to have the science, not necessarily the technical details. I didn't want to make it hard to read, but I wanted them to have the science that tells them beyond any reasonable doubt that the story that we've been told about our origin and our potential is no longer supported by the evidence. So for me, when the evidence no longer supports the story, it's time for a new story, and that is hence the new human story. So the first part of the book is the science that is showing us the peer-reviewed science. So it's not just my theory or my hypothesis. It is the peer-reviewed science that's showing us that the physical evidence does not support the story that we are all being told. We're steeped in this story of Darwin's idea of evolution. And as a degreed geologist, Brian, I've seen evolution in the fossil record, and it is a fact for some forms of life, insects, animals, plants. Something so mysterious happened 200,000 years ago. We appeared, and evolution is not what led to our appearance. The theory breaks down. The physical evidence doesn't support it, but where I get really excited, because we've known for a long time the physical evidence didn't support it. Where I get really excited is the new DNA evidence that cannot be refuted. And it is causing scientists, it's a problem for scientists who are steeped in the evolutionary theory of long, slow, gradual changes over a long period of time, because that's not what happened. We appeared relatively suddenly 200,000 years ago with this advanced genetic structure and this amazing extended neural network, unlike any other form of life.
Since the late 1800s, there have been countless newspaper articles reporting discoveries of giant human remains being found all over the world. 18 strange skeletons found in Wisconsin, giant skull in San Antonio, Texas, giant bones found in New York, as well as similar discoveries in Austin, Texas, Los Angeles, Boston, and the list goes on. So if any of these were real, then why aren't there any of these fossils in museums? This is where things get interesting, as some people claim that the conspiracy lies not in the giant skeletal discoveries, but in their cover-ups. If giants once existed, would that discredit the theory of evolution? And if any of these giant skeletons are indeed real, does that necessarily tie them to Nephilim, an ancient race of people, like Hercules, believed to be the son of gods? There are also numerous comments that claim the bones given to the Smithsonian were all mysteriously lost before they could be put on display.
In 1848, Lincoln said, "The eyes of extinct giants, whose bones fill the mounds of America, have gazed on Niagara Falls, just as our eyes do now." It was common to see in the newspapers reports on excavations of giant bones and oversized human skeletons of lengths between 7 and 12 feet. Many of these digs were the accidental discovery of common farmers who, in the process of turning the soil of their fields, were confronted with remains of some human leviathan. The farmer would then send for the country doctor and the town marshal. Like others in his rural community, the farmer was most likely to be a man of religious conviction, a reader of the Bible, a believer that there were giants in the earth. As the pioneers of the 19th century tamed a continent, the urgency of farming supplanted all respect for Native American burial mounds. The sites where giant humanoids were discovered numbered in the hundreds. The country doctor may have measured the dimensions of the body. The local newspaper may have sent out a photographer to capture an image of the interred as it rested in the ground. After the skeleton was exhumed, it may have been exhibited in the town hall. This was before it became the vogue in archaeology to apply a preservative for the protection of excavated bones. On exposure to air, on account of the acidic content of the skeleton itself, a mighty specimen might crumble to dust within a decade. The Smithsonian Institution was reluctant to put these finds on display. The Institute was indifferent to, and sometimes willfully neglectful of, the idea of an ancient race, predating the occupation of North America by the first peoples. The idea was contrary to the narrative that the Smithsonian sought to preserve. in its own version of history. They also preferred to promote the manifest destiny of European settlers, to occupy an entire country, displacing its Native Americans. At the same time, the Smithsonian was accepting donations of ancient bones from all over the country, examining and documenting these treasures using their experts in a field known as ethnology. How did so many specimens go missing? They can no longer be found in the Smithsonian collections. The records of analysis are gone, as are the logbooks, in which was recorded the dates when they received the remains of these giants, and the names and addresses of the donors who had shipped the precious cargo cross-country. A United States Supreme Court ruling in 2014 forced the Smithsonian Institution to release classified papers from the early 1900s, proving it was involved in a major cover-up of evidence, in which hundreds of specimens of giant humans were ordered by high-level administrators to be destroyed to protect the scientific consensus of the age, which just happened to favor the shiny new theory of Charles Darwin on human evolution.
We are now at Kaunkaunamnam Caves, and we found like a huge and complete skeleton of a primate, with a huge reptile skeleton on the side. The height of the primate is estimated to be 6.5 meters. According to the skull and the tools, it might be a male. He is lying in a natural position, with his hand clasping.
John asks, I've always been unclear about parts of the Bible, especially Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 7, where it talks about the sons of God and giants, that is the Nephilim, how they came to earth and took daughters of men as their wives. It also states that God was unhappy with the human race, which is why he destroyed it. It kind of seems like that God made a mistake, which I thought wasn't possible. Can you shed some light on this? Well, John, let me just say, thanks for asking the question. A lot of us get a little confused with different parts of the Bible, but this one confuses everybody I know. I need to be honest with you when it comes to the Nephilim. Nobody is really sure of who that refers to. If you saw the latest movie Noah, though, I can be fairly sure with you that those weren't giant stone people that were portrayed in that movie. So we don't know the exact reference of the Nephilim. But here's the even more important part of your question to me. I'm not sure what you meant by it kind of seems like God made a mistake. If you mean that he should not have given us the freedom to choose wrong in the garden, you'll need to argue that with him. But I think the fault is ours when so many choose to live lives of debauchery and deception and so damage our children by not giving them the good examples they need to see what are the consequences of choosing God instead of sin. I understand why God wanted to start all over again in the world. I really do, because the direction it was going again was not a good one. And God did ultimately start all over again, but ultimately intervened with the life of Jesus Christ, with picturing what happens when you live life right, and then started with those of us who were focusing on him, fixing our eyes on Jesus. But to the philosophical point of God maybe not giving us a choice, maybe that was his mistake, let me just point this out. If we can't choose to love or not to love, then we really can't love. It's not really love of our own free choice. It's not really our love. Love has to be our choice. As it says in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 15, and then on into verse 19, God does give us a choice. It says, "See, I have set before you life and prosperity, and death and adversity." And then he later says, "Choose life, so that you and your descendants may live." May we all make that choice to give something better to our descendants than a cycle of sin and a really bad example.